people want to be at that Ferries conference. It is just really the place to be. So we are so thrilled to have Peter here today to talk about, to get us in a little bit of a dreamer mindset as we pivot to the afternoon, and in the afternoon talk about, how our communities are going to come together to work around advocating for the boats this legislative session. So Peter, come on up, and thank you so much.
I want to thank Amy for inviting me. This is a great gathering, and this is exactly the kind of stuff that I love to do and I get involved in. So great job, Amy, and I think this should be a regular event. I know some of you from way back, and others I don't know, so I thought I'd give you a little bit about my professional background just so you have a little bit of context, and then make some remarks on my thoughts on Washington State Ferries, and then my thoughts on the mosquito fleet moving forward and our opportunities. So this is not a dreamer thing. This is aspirational, but even more importantly, I think everything that I'm going to talk about, I think, is achievable in the relatively near future, and it's something that whose time has come, really. So I grew up in the maritime industry. My childhood memories were of my father clicking away at his typewriter keys in the room next to my bedroom, because he was the editor of a trade journal called the Fisherman's News, which was the journal of record for the commercial fishing industry on the West Coast. And after I graduated from college, while I was in college, I worked on commercial fishing tenders in Alaska and in canneries and such. And the way most of my high school classmates did back in the 70s, we were very commercial fishing dependent in the Pacific Northwest, and that was something that we all did. When I graduated from college, I went to work for my father, who by that time had started a magazine called Pacific Maritime Magazine, which is a maritime publication aimed at commercial mariners and terminal operators and people who work on the working waterfront. And I worked for him until his passing in '99, at which point my brother, who worked with us as well, my brother and I incorporated as Phillips Publishing Group. We bought Fisherman's News from my dad's former partner, and we were hired by an association called the Passenger Vessel Association to introduce a monthly magazine for their group. And the Passenger Vessel Association represents the interests of passenger vessels of all kinds around the country. So Washington State Ferries, Kitsap Transit, King County Marine Division, Argosy, Clipper, Puget Sound Express, Drew Schmidt's boats, anybody that operates a commercial vessel, passenger vessel in the United States, is represented by the Passenger Vessel Association. And so I got to know ferry operators. We began to publish under contract some onboard magazines for ferry operators, including Clipper, Blackball Ferry Line, which operates the Coho, Catalina Express out of Southern California, Clearwater Ferry in Florida, and Highline Cruises, which runs between Nantucket, Hyannis, and Martha's Vineyard. And then we began to diversify into contract publications for suburban cities, and we were hired by cities to develop quarterly magazines for suburban cities such that the city could communicate with its residents. And the cities that were most attractive to us, where the model worked, were smaller mid-sized cities, like we did Stanwood, Monroe, Cedro-Woolley, Lakewood, Des Moines, Normandy Park, and I got to know suburban cities. At the same time, to differentiate ourselves from our competitors, my brother and I decided that we really wanted to be active advocates for the industry sectors that we represented. And one of the ways to do that was the development of a conference series. And one of the conferences that I developed was a Ferries conference that Amy alluded to or mentioned, and we started the first one in 2003. And my thought at the time was that the ultimate client of a ferry operation is a city or a county or a municipality, any group that wants to move people between point A and point B and has access to water with which to do it. They don't know how to operate ferries. So the idea of the Ferries Conference is to help educate them on financing, planning, hiring an operator, exactly what we all are trying to do today. And I've been doing that again since 2003. I also got very involved in public policy, land use, and transportation policy as part of my advocacy efforts. I was the president of a group called the Seattle Marine Business Coalition for 10 years, from 2000 to 2012, and we advocated on behalf of marine industrial land owners within the Seattle city limits. So we worked with, and sometimes in opposition to, the City of Seattle, the Seattle City Council, the Port of Seattle. I got very engaged with and knowledgeable about bureaucracies like Washington State Ferries, the Port of Seattle, the city, et cetera. And I learned how to work collaboratively with those in elected office and in public bureaucracies that were in opposition to me. That was very valuable, not to burn the bridges even though you were on opposite sides of the table. I was on the Viaduct Advisory Committee in my capacity as SMBC president. The Viaduct Advisory Committee was a group that the state, the county, and the city put together right after the Seattle earthquake in 2001 to determine what to do with the viaduct. The city and the state saw an opportunity to remove that viaduct and replace it with something else, and they asked us, as the advisory committee, to advise them. And for a year, I got to see the best and the brightest engineering firms, urban planners, et cetera, from around the world who would come and present to us. And so I got to learn exactly what was going to happen. And not coincidentally, my wife and I decided after that year that we would sell our little commercial property and our home in Seattle and move south. Because what has happened in Seattle was foreseen by city planners in 2008. So I learned all about that kind of stuff. And so now my role really is a marine transit advocate. I do the Ferries Conference. I publish some magazines for suburban cities. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I have been really interested in helping us expand marine transit and fix what's happening with Washington State Ferries. Not necessarily fix Washington State Ferries. There are others who are better suited than me to do that, but to provide alternatives and fill in gaps where Washington State Ferries is not doing what we all hoped, what they used to be able to do and what we hoped to see them do today. So Washington State Ferries does do some things very well, and I think that they will always be the go-to agency to do this. And that's to move large volumes of things slowly between 2 points, i.e. cars, freight, a lot of people that want to go at the same time to the same place and back. What they don't do well is move passengers high speed on a passenger-only ferry. They tried to do it back in the early 2000s. They bought 2 boats, ran them for not very long, figured out they couldn't do it, and to their credit, there was a executive director at that time named Mike Thorne. Some of you may remember him. And he said, we don't do this well. We shouldn't be in the passenger-only ferry market. But state law prohibits anybody else from doing it in our stead. So Mike went to the state legislature and he said, we don't do this well. We shouldn't be doing it. Somebody should be doing it. Change the law so they can do it. And that gave birth to King County and Kitsap Transit, that and other things. But that's why those agencies were able to start their own passenger-only ferry service. And subsequent legislative action has made it even easier, even simpler, not easier, simpler for public counties, cities, and community groups to operate ferries independent of state control. They funded along those lines when they said, okay, well, we're going to allow others to operate ferry service, but we got to see how that's going to look. So that was the genesis for the Puget Sound Regional Council 2008 ferry study, which we all refer to now. It was updated a couple years ago, and that was specifically designed to look at what passenger-only ferry service might look like if it were allowed to move forward. It was a very good study in 2008. It taught us a lot of things, and we have Kitsap Transit and King County Marine Division partly as a result of that. But it was a 2008 study. Amazon wasn't around. South Lake Union wasn't around. Modern cell phones weren't around. A lot has changed since then. So when they did the study 3 years ago, the legislature said update the 2008 study. And so they were constrained to do the 2008 study in 2000, I think it was 18 or 19. I don't think that study is as valuable to us as was the first one. There is talk about doing another study, which I think is really, really important. We need a system-wide or a sound-wide study, passenger-only study. I think it would be great if Washington State Ferries was funded to have the money to do it. I don't think Washington State Ferries should do it. I think it should be an independent group that does it, that doesn't have any of the restrictions that were with that PSRC study or any of the restrictions that existing bureaucracy like Washington State Ferries might need. But I think a study like that is very important.
Peter, let me just mention one thing. I'm sorry. So it was funded by the legislature to do another one following the 2018 and 2019 one. The WSF was contracted with an external entity, and I think it's the same one that did the 2018-19 update. And as we speak, the terms of reference for that consultant are being developed right now. And I think the value of the study is approximately $160,000 or something. I can't remember. I might be getting that correct.
Yeah.
No, sorry, it's 500, $500,000.
Yeah, and I think it's KPFF that's doing it.
I think so.
Yeah.
And so my ears are burning right now with what you're saying. So if I would hope that they consult you as a potentially interesting source of information, but.
They don't need, KPFF has all the expertise they need to do that. They don't need me.
Awesome. Okay. But anyway.
But this is the problem and I should caveat this as saying, please ask me questions. I'm much better at, this kind of thing. So if you have a question, interrupt or raise a hand to do this, because I want to talk to you about what you guys want to hear. I don't want to present what I think you want to hear. The challenge with the study that is necessary for what we need to do, and we were talking about it at lunch, is that it's going to be expensive. And when PSRC did that updated study in 2018, they only had, I think it was $350,000. They did a really good job with it. That was a very well done study, but it was using what I think they were forced to use that old information. $500,000 is more, but I don't think it's enough. And I think KPFF would tell you that it's not enough, because we ideally what we have would be a microanalysis, like, how many boats, what do we need to move people from Friday Harbor to Anacortes? Do we need to move people from Friday Harbor to Everett or to Friday Harbor to Seattle? What would that take? How many people need to go from East Sound to Friday Harbor? When do they need to do it? What about the school kids? What about all these kind of things? That is such a big lift that we're going to kind of get the same kind of thing, which anecdotally we already know. That's my concern. But and let me get back to what I think a solution is. But so that's what Washington State Ferries. I mean, they do some things very well. I think we need to support them. I think they need to be rationalized. And when I say rationalized, I don't mean a decrease in service, but what are they using their resources for? I will say this, that at one of my conferences, I had the executive director of Washington State Ferries and the executive director of BC Ferries, and they're very similar types of operations in terms of budget and people moved. Washington State Ferries executive director said, every day I get a call, hey, this is Representative Sims, I'm from Chelan, and there are not enough young women from my school district being employed at the state level. What can you do to put them aboard Washington State Ferries? He says, thank you, Ms. Sims, I will do what I can, and he begins to work on that project. 2 days later, he gets somebody from Lucaner and says, hey, we've got a machine shop here, and they make rivets that would be really great for the boats. We'd like you to take a look at using them. Yes, sir, I'll take a look at that. So Washington State Ferry's executive director is putting out all these little fires. BC Ferries, they negotiate with the Parliament a service contract for 5 years, every 5 years. And they say, okay, this is what you're hiring us to do. These are the tax dollars we're getting. This is what we're expected to do. This is what we're going to do. Somebody calls up and says, hey, I've got a machine shop in Coquitlam. I need you to do this and that. He says, thank you, Minister. We'll discuss it in 5 years when we next do our contract. And that's a huge, huge difference. And I see Representative Nance there, and that is something that we need to change. And so that's an example of where Washington State Ferries is not well suited to run these smaller routes, because they'd have to do all of that on a, yeah.
Well, we've heard through the grapevine that there is a potential that Washington State Ferries is going to take over Kitsap and the King County ferry system, the smaller boats, to run those, the water taxis. And you don't know anything about that?
I hope not. And we should
Well,
stop.
okay, and I just want to make real clear that I think we should be lobbying to not have that happen.
In my opinion, that would be the worst of all worlds.
Okay, I just wanted to.
And I don't think Washington State Ferries rank and file would want to do that. No, but you get a lot of, so another example, and whether you agree with this initiative or not, the electrification initiative for Washington State Ferries is going to be enormously expensive. Nobody knows how expensive it's going to be because nobody knows what the technology is going to be like that is needed to do that. Right now, the plan is to build a ferry that has a battery on it and push it with a diesel engine. That's what they're planning to do, because they don't know how they're going to deliver shoreside infrastructure to it. They plan to down the line, but they don't know how they're going to do that. So they're going to have the most inefficient boat possible, which is legislatively mandated. Let me just finish real quick. 10 years ago, the Washington State Ferries were told to convert everything to LNG. They spent tens of millions of dollars going down that path before the state legislature decided, nope, now we're going to go to electricity. Throw all that out. So these are some of the burdens that Washington State Ferries has imposed upon them by the legislature. You had a question?
Yeah, I think in our communications with some of the ferry dock workers, we've heard that there's going to be like a diesel generator, and again, like don't necessarily know. I guess we don't have the exact communications, but we were told because a boat can't plug into the Bremerton electric grid, whatever,
Yeah.
that they're going to have a diesel generator that is going to pretty much pollute more to be able to support the electrified ferry. So again, these are rumors, but kind of to your point about like there's going to still be diesel even
Yeah.
with electrification, which
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily get to the green initiatives that they're trying to get.
Yeah, it's,
And a lot of the routes they can't support any kind of electric hookup. Vashon cannot have they don't have a design that we can ever have any hookups for any of our ferries. Now, it's a short run, so it isn't as problematic as your run. But there are other docks that are not going to be suited either. And I imagine the San Juans would be one of those.
so not to get too distracted, I think we all agree on this situation. I think Washington State Ferries, we'll see what happens there. But what Amy asked me to do is to talk to you about what the alternatives are and what we can do to fill in the gaps. And I think it's the mosquito fleet. And, Greg talked a lot about, his thoughts on the mosquito fleet, and you're all educated audience, you know what the mosquito fleet is all about. So what I've found, and again, I am not a subject matter expert. I convene subject matter experts and I listen to what they say, and I'm reporting that back to you. So the demographic, technological, and socioeconomic changes in our region in the last 5 years have completely changed the commuter dynamic, which makes small, high-speed, passenger-only ferries a very viable alternative to the big car ferries that we're used to. In the old days, you had 300,000 people driving into Seattle between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m., and you had 300,000 people driving out of Seattle between 4 and 6 p.m. Mass transit was developed around that model. That doesn't happen anymore. Only 100,000 people go into Seattle in any one day, and they go in spread over 8 hours. that kind of a transit model is well suited to a small, fast, nimble service. And passenger-only ferries do that. Another thing is that smaller boats are less expensive to build, less expensive to maintain, and require far less infrastructure. The small passenger-only ferries that are in existence today, traditionally powered ones, can call at any recreational marina in the state. In Des Moines, I ran a pilot project, and we ran the Chilkat Express, a 70-passenger boat that All American built, and we ran between the Des Moines Marina to downtown Seattle, and we made absolutely no modifications to the dock at either side. We put the boat into service, we carried 60 passengers up, 60 passengers back, took them off. The turn was about 8 minutes. There was there were 3 people on the boat, and one person got off the boat with a little scanner. People paid right there. They got on the boat. We put, if it was oversold, we say, it's oversold, you 10 people stand over here. Here's a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. When we were out of numbers, you guys aren't going to make the boat, and then we'd send them home. 5 minutes before the boat was supposed to leave, if there were 5 spots, we'd say 1 through 5, come with us, and it was that fast and that efficient. So it's so simple to do now. Talked about the infrastructure. There's no infrastructure needed. The boats, so the Chilkat Express, this is an example of scale. Chilkat Express was built in 1991. She's perfectly serviceable. She was built to be a fast ferry in Alaska. She's a whale watching boat. They want to sell it because they've replaced it with a bigger boat. They're asking $1 million for it. There's another boat just like it, $1 million. So these used boats are affordable. That's compared to $400 million for Washington State Ferries. This is $1 million. A brand new boat like that, a brand new 150 passenger boat at All American or Nichols or Maverick, that boat would cost about $5 million. An electric boat that with existing technology, compliant with existing laws, would cost about $8 million. So these are scales of affordability that are accessible. The electric boat technology exists now. The Europeans are using these boats. There are 2 companies that I'm pretty familiar with. One is Candela, they're Swedish, and the other is Artemis, and they're from Ireland, Northern Ireland. They're both operating commercially viable electric fast ferries in Scandinavia right now. They can't operate them in the United States, but they can't operate them in the United States because they haven't built them in the United States. But they are compliant with our laws. Some of the projected electric boats that are being planned, most notably Kitsap Transit, are bigger boats, and they're not Coast Guard certified. They will be because the technology is in proven application around the world, but they're not proven. They're not permitted right now by the Coast Guard, but these smaller boats are. So what would be necessary is for the intellectual property, the Scandinavians to come over with their know-how, hire American workers, and build them in the U.S. yard. So there's a workforce development component there too that could be done. And I'm going through this kind of fast because we have a limited amount of time, but I want to take questions. Maritime economy of Puget. Yeah, Rick.
Well, I don't need to interrupt your sentence. Go ahead.
No, I was going to start on a whole new topic.
Well, so I'd just like to suggest that the term mosquito fleet could be pretty confusing for anybody who knows the history. So I don't know about the other islands, but Vashon had something like 20 landings, and it was like a bus stop, and you stood out at the end of the pier and waved down the boat with your hanky, and they pulled in and picked you up. They were small steamers, and they couldn't carry any freight. They were passenger only. I think for the most part, there were a few exceptions. So I'm just a little concerned that people will have a different idea, a visual in their mind when you say the words mosquito fleet. What I think you mean, or maybe Greg, when you talk about it, you're really just saying something like the Kitsap Fast Ferries. or like the Metro water taxi. Am I right? Or are you saying there would be more stops around the edges of an island? You know, there was no Vashon Highway that ran from north to south until the early 50s because all of the communities were around the edge of the island.
The entire Puget Sound was like that.
Well, but I didn't know that for sure.
Yeah. No. Well, so my thought is that because of the accessibility, the relatively low barrier to entry to run a passenger-only ferry service, it's not an either or. My thought is this: is that independent special interests, like a county or a city or community members, could stand up their own ferry to serve their own particular route needs. For example, the San Juan Islands, inter-island to Anacortes could be one administrative construct, operational construct. The Vashon route that we've been talking about, Vashon, Seattle, Des Moines, could be another. Thurston County to Point Ruston, they could all be stood up independently, similar to what the Mosquito Fleet did. However, my thought is that we would have assistance from the state and or larger counties to help with the administrative and capital costs. Very similar to what we see in San Francisco. San Francisco has an administrative construct called WETA, Water Emergency Transportation Authority. And WETA buys the boats, maintains the boats, and then hires different private operators to run the boats between 2 points. So that's kind of...
I don't think you're responding to the question I was attempting to ask.
Okay.
You probably did a bad job. I'm asking you if on an island like Vashon, would there be more than 2 docks? The concept of Mosquito Fleet, to me, implicitly includes the idea that there's a whole bunch of little
So
stops.
doesn't
Yes.
this have overwhelmingly point-to-point or ABC on the triangle route? And then there's inter-island, there's 4 or 5 stops. The beauty about this modality is it's much more agile and flexible. So, for instance, up in Jefferson County, we're from Clallam, from Port Angeles to Port Townsend to Port Ludlow down to Kingston. That could become a new quadrangle route that you could never do with an auto ferry, but you could very easily stand up with passenger only. And then Kitsap, we're a long peninsula. You could have 5 or 6 recreational marinas. We have 11 public ports could be roped in. So some of these will be A/B. Others can be multifaceted based on community needs.
Community needs, okay.
Yeah.
But I would recommend.
I understand what you're saying, Rick.
Spends time on marketing and messaging, that you think hard about whether you want to use the term Mosquito Fleet. Because there is a significant percentage of people who will hear it differently than you mean it. That's
Okay.
all I'm trying to say. I love the idea.
Point taken. Let's you and I talk offline about it, because I have some remarks on.
I want to make sure we have time for Peter to go through, like, finish out, and then let's give you.
Okay, well, I'll be very, I've said most of what I want to say. I'll say that the one unique advantage that we have in Puget Sound that nobody else has is that the maritime industry is centered in Puget Sound. At one time, not very long ago, and it may still be true, every single commercial workboat and ferry that was operating on the west coast of the United States was built in Puget Sound. Every single one of them. You know that LA Long Beach is the largest container port in the United States. The operators in that container port are all Puget Sound companies. The terminal operators, the tugboat companies, the dredging companies are all based here. The maritime attorneys, they're here. An anecdotal story which will illustrate this perfectly. If not the preeminent naval architecture school, if maybe number 1 or 2, is called the Webb Institute. It's on Long Island in New York. They graduate about 150 people a year, naval architects. They had their 130th annual reunion about 5 years ago. I was invited. It was in Seattle. I asked one of the members there, I said, why did you choose Seattle to have your 130th anniversary? And he said, well, about 40% of our alumni are engaged in the maritime industry in Washington, D.C. They work for the federal government. Another 40% are in Puget Sound. So that is illustrative of the amount of maritime expertise that we have. So we can build the boats, we can power the boats, we can do everything that we need, and we don't have to have a build them in Washington caveat to do that. A big passenger-only ferry, a big car ferry, you do because that's an enormous project. But these smaller boats would be built here. So we could further the workforce development issues. Dan was talking about this workforce development that the Master Mates and Pilots is doing through my tags, taking the AB on. We could take high school students, we could take them in ninth grade, introduce them, and in fact, we're doing this. Des Moines School District, Highline School District has a maritime high school that's doing exactly this. They take this, and Senator Elias would be happy about this. They take these kids, and the maritime high school kids are predominantly BIPOC right now because that's who lives down there. Introduce them to the maritime industry in ninth grade, and by high school, they're ready to go on a boat. And then and the first step where you don't need to be an AB is on Kitsap Transit. King County you do. I think you have to be a member of the union to be in King County. But a lot of these passenger vessel operators will take a seasonal worker right out of high school. All they have to do is be able to follow directions and speak English and be ambulatory. And then they begin to train them, and then they go into programs like that. So it's a wonderful step into workforce development. So all that said, and grants too. Should I talk a little bit about the grants? We talked a little bit about this morning, then I saw your question, and then I'll get to that. We talked a little bit about this morning, I think you had some concerns about federal money being available within the administration, and they alluded to these programmatic grants, which is the case. We have the three major sources of federal grant funding for ferries are with the Federal Highway Administration, and one is a rural grant, which the San Juan, I think Rick Larson was part of that. They got that fixed so that they can access that. And then there are two other grant programs. And these are programs that they're currently oversubscribed, which means that there are more applicants than there are monies available. But what happens with federal programs when they're oversubscribed very often is that more money gets put into that federal program. And it's at the bureaucratic, technocratic level. It really has nothing to do with the administration that's in power. It's the guy that's been sitting at the same desk for 25 years. Those guys do it amongst themselves. So I think we're in good shape with the federal money. Federal money is really expensive to access. Just ask Kitsap Transit that's been working for years to get federal money. State money, especially now when we have, the Climate Commitment Act has been saved, state money is far more accessible, and state money is what I think we're looking at accessing, because we're asking for a smaller amount. If three counties get together and say, we need $15 million so we can build 3 boats, so we can call between these 3 counties and serve 1.3 million people, that's a much easier lift than Vashon with 10,000 people saying we need to do that ourselves, or San Juan with whatever you guys have. So you had a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if in your criteria to favor passenger-only boats, if you're considering CO2 emissions. So it seems to me if you have 150 people on a passenger-only boat, they get across the water, mission accomplished. So if you want to move those same 250 people on a ferry boat, each driving a car, the ferry boats use an awful lot of diesel going across here, a lot of CO2 emissions in there. So it seems to me you have a rather major argument of favoring that way. I mean, we have the Climate Commitment Act, which is contributing $500,000 towards the ferries, and it's a very high priority of our state, particularly under Governor Inslee, to reduce CO2 emissions. And so, are you using that argument?
Well, so I'm going to talk only about passenger-only ferries.
No, I know.
Okay.
That is an argument.
Yeah.
Of why we want to institute passenger ferries.
Yeah. So
they are much more climate friendly than those big ferry boats.
They are. But they are emitters of greenhouse gases. The faster you move a boat, the more the more greenhouse gas, the lesser the efficiency in greenhouse gases.
Do you have the figures on CO2 per passenger with a passenger only boat compared to CO2 per passenger at the big guy?
Yeah, those figures exist, but it depends on how far you're moving them, how many people you are, but it is more detrimental to move people. However, that said, with the existing technology, it is much less detrimental than it has been just as recently as 5 years ago. And in fact, there are scrubbers and there are things that can remove those CO2s so that there's very little greenhouse gas emissions on a traditionally powered boat. Ultimately, the idea is to electrify those boats. And then the argument can be made that you're just pushing that, that pollution up the pipeline, but anytime that you, in my mind, anytime you employ artificial means to move people, you're going to have a certain amount of deleterious effect on the environment. The best thing to do is walk.
My point is, you have a considerable advantage in that, and I'm asking if you're emphasizing that advantage. I understand all that you're saying.
Okay.
But, it's a major deal, and it should be part of the analysis, the criteria somebody uses to decide how we're going to move people from the island community.
Point taken. I have no argument with that. I think you're right.
Yeah, just real quick, kind of echoing on that, I just want to talk about timelines and the practicality of all of this. Emily Alvarado advanced our cause in terms of getting the additional funds for a water taxi, to expand on our water taxi to downtown Seattle. It was wonderful, got it done. That came out in, past the legislature, it was out in March. By July 1, we had those routes. They had them designed and they were ready to go. In November, we are now talking about King County, and we're talking with them about expanding a commuter system with small shuttles on Vashon. And then on the other side, they've already expanded a bus route that's moving people from down at the dock all the way up to most of the major hospitals and medical centers in Seattle, which was a major problem for us getting people over. So I'm just saying, in less than 6 months, we have gone from having additional service and expanding stuff we're working on expanding within our community and then on the other side. So there is another answer. You're taking people out of cars, and people are willing to get out of cars when they don't have to transfer 4 times or whatever, and they're going downtown and they're going to be able to get on a quick transit up. So all I'm saying is all of these things can be done cheaper and much quicker than Washington State Ferries can do.
And you make a good point. I think the natural home for most of these operations is your local existing transit authority. Kitsap Transit runs. No?
We don't have a transit authority in San Juan County.
Well, does Bellingham have one? Does Anacortes have one?
Yeah, sure.
Those are the ones that would.
I know, I'm laughing.
And that's because that's.
We're just so the backwards, I'm listening to you and I'm like salivating, you guys got $3.14 million from the legislature. We got a few tens of thousands for some studies. So anyway, I'm just saying, we all have our complaints.
Everybody's at a different. That's why I think this one size fits all won't work.
No, but I'm so inspired by what you're talking about. I'm inspired by what I just heard you say, and this is why our county, we've got work to do, to figure out within ourselves how can we connect.
The first thing you do is you sign an interlocal agreement with a county that has a transit agency. Step one.
Schedule.
Okay. I don't know your scenario well, but that's step one. Once you have that interlocal agreement and you and this other agency have a formal agreement, then you can work together to do it.
So I'm from Vietnam, and
This is my council member.
I'm soon to be a council member to the next change. And as you talk about mosquito fleets, I think San Juan County did the route of the mosquito fleet, which was a bunch of us who were tired of being left at the dock, got in a boat and started driving around the county and literally picking people up at the docks that were available. And it was done with zero funding. It was done completely on a community activism standpoint, and it was done out of absolute desperation and necessity. So if you want to talk about mosquito fleet and what it means, swing on up. I'll throw you on a 6-passenger boat and I'll make it real cold for an hour. But the inspiration that I take from that and where we have made progress is we got noticed. And I think the governor noticed that that the Washington State Ferry solution, the institutional solution, the big box solution, wasn't going to be a way to meet our needs. And so I'm pretty happy to say that we got $1.5 million to pilot a program. And so I think there's a recognition at the top level of what you're talking about. And I think there's a little bit of momentum to say, hey, this might be our way, maybe not out of the problem, but our way to make progress on the problem. Well, Washington State Ferries is building themselves back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the state's role is, you get, I don't know if you put it in DOT or what, or maybe Commerce or Health and Human Services, I don't know where you would put it, but you put a pocket of money, a bunch of money that's perpetually funded at a certain level, and then you make that available for application. So you guys could say, okay, this is what we need here for our residents, which is unique than what Bremerton needs, right? From what Vashon needs. But one other keys that I really want to emphasize, because we have a regional group here, it's going to be a hub and spoke system, because ultimately where everybody wants to go is either the airport or downtown Seattle. And in downtown Seattle, there is only one piece of land left that can accommodate passenger-only ferry service, and that's at Pier 48, the uplands at Pier 48, which is just south of Coleman Dock, just south of the King County Marine Division. And that basin of water is ideally suited for passenger-only ferry service expansion. Keep that uplands at 48, keep that in your head, because you're going to be, maybe by me, called on during the legislative session to say, protect that. Right now, Washington State Ferries controls that land, and they haven't given it up. They're not using it, but they haven't given it up. So it's accessible to everything that we need. So just keep that in the back of your head. Yes.
Hi, I'm Cody Bakken. I'm FAC member for the Clinton Terminal. I have a question kind of for you, but also for our regional leaders that are present. One of the things that has been done with buses that I don't see happening, and is kind of unique, is recognizing that it's a safe space. If you're running from a domestic abuser, you can catch the bus and say, I need to get out of here, he's gonna kill me. And you're in a safe space, and they will take you where you need to go, a shelter or whatever. Ferries don't have that kind of variability of where they're going, right? It's a waterway. But we can make ferries more than just A to B or A to B to C to D. They can be a place where people can gather. We could put Wi-Fi on the buses to make it so that people can do their studies or meetings while they're traveling. We could put library branches on those so that people have something else to access. Libraries are a great resource for a number of reasons. We can partner with other agencies that have nothing to do with transportation and make it more of a community space, a community anchor institution. Why can't we access that funding?
Yeah, that's not a question for me, because
sorry, that was more soapbox than it was actually a question. But that's really to plant that seed in those who need to germinate that. Because we're talking about transportation, and that is a very important aspect. But we are complex beings, and transportation is only one aspect of our existence. We all have multiple things that we care about, so we should have multiple things imbricated together to work together.
yeah, I think, one thing that I could comment on is I think that when this expanded marine transit system, the non-mosquito fleet, the unmosquito fleet, is developed, then there will be unintended benefits that we could and that we could use them for. So I think there's something in there to be.
Can we call it the bumblebee fleet?
Wait, no, the orca fleet. The orca fleet.
Orca fleet.
Peter, question back to our conversation we were having at lunch. We're talking about the walk-on ferry study. And then in the background, there's these economic impact studies that are coming together. And as we heard from our panelists, our legislative panelists, storytelling is huge, and the impact of funding on our transportation systems and how that affects us statewide, and how do we tell that story to east of the mountains. And I thought we were having a great discussion here about the importance of really telling the global economic story, and if you would comment on how you see that being able to develop so that we can make this a bigger discussion point.
You're talking about the job study, the SMBC study that I was involved in?
Well, yeah, and you were talking about how really to really say, what is the impact of our marine transit system on the overall state economy?
Yeah, okay, so I was part of a group called the Seattle Marine Business Coalition, and we were responsible for advocating on behalf of marine industrial land users. And the city of Seattle, when Greg Nichols came into office, he convened a Blue Ribbon Task Force to look at all the economic sectors in the city of Seattle and their impact on the economy. And maritime wasn't in there. So we bitched about it, and finally they said, okay, it's too late. This Blue Ribbon Task Force is too far down the road to do anything. What do you guys want? And I said, we want an economic impact study that demonstrates the economic impact of the maritime industry on the Seattle economy. And it was only Seattle at that time, but this could be done statewide. And they said, okay, we'll get somebody to do it. And I said, no. We want a director. We want to hire the economist, and we want to direct that study. And I was the point person on that. And when the economist was hired, David Summers was his name from the UW, I said, I want a study that says you pick up the phone and say, how many people do you employ? What do you make? What do you sell it for? What do you pay in taxes? Click. I don't want, this third party, the one job creates 10 or 7 or 8. I just want that simple study, because that makes an impact. And what we found in the city of Seattle was that the maritime economy in the city per annum had a $5 billion per annum direct economic impact. Our employment during the recession in 2008 grew 3% per year, and our payroll grew 20% per year. And those are the only 3 bullet points I ever needed to use. And then some show me the study, boom, and it was only 4, 5, 6 pages long, with including all of the resources, the references. And that was so powerful. And that would be a relatively simple economic impact study that we could do statewide. And it would be the economic impact, because as I said, not only would we be serving the communities that we need to serve, but those boats would be built here, they would be operated by Washington State employees. Everything that happened, it would be a closed loop. All the money that's spent would go right back into the economy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess the point of the question was really just to emphasize that moving passengers is great. We all want to move passengers, but there is an economic impact that if you don't move those passengers, I guess it's the opposite study. There's a negative impact implication by not moving those people.
Yeah. There are many instances where, for example, around the country you'll have, and I can't remember exactly where this was, but there was a prison, a federal prison wanted to locate. Believe it or not, federal prisons are really good job creators. I didn't know that. They wanted to locate, aren't they? Okay.
They are.
So they were wanted to locate, and I think it was someplace in the south, but they didn't have any part in this rural county that had a demographic concentration large enough to supply the employees, unless they connected 2 demographic units across the river from each other with a ferry, which they did. And all of a sudden, they didn't have 2 30,000 person municipalities. They had one 60,000. That was big enough. They decided to they cited the prison there because people could get to work, right? And so that's the same thing, in San Juan Islands, if you could be in Anacortes in 30 minutes, from Easttown, from Friday Harbor, from Lopez, that would be a boon to Anacortes. That's one of the reasons they might want to sign an interlocal agreement, right? And conversely, if you want to open a restaurant in Friday Harbor, but you can't get anybody to afford to live in Friday Harbor, well, they could live in Anacortes and commute back and forth. And
We have people who live in Anacortes and work in the county. It's a thing.
does that answer the question?
No,
Okay.
that's perfect. I just wanted you to kind of get that out there.
And
Greg?
For reference, the study that you're speaking to is due December 15th. We'll have an economic review about basically the unit cost of a canceled sailing by Washington State Ferries. We've had talk in abstraction, and it's really frustrating. I was at the White House trying to represent our interest for more ferry funding. The message was basically, hey, come back with data, documentation, designs. So cool, we're going to come back with data, documentation, designs, and one of the elements is if you don't have a cost of what doesn't happen, what's not occurring, how do we compete with Florida after a hurricane, which has a direct insurance bill? We don't, and we get left out. So we're trying to go back with more of our homework completed.
That would be, I think that should be on your website, right? That should be on everybody's website.
Does it calculate what happens to the crew when it's canceled because of crew failure, not enough crew, because you're paying the crew still, the rest of the crew? Does it include that?
Perhaps. Yeah, perhaps. And just a quick data point. So we have a casino called the Clearwater in Suquamish, one business in Kitsap. They estimate that one canceled sailing creates $100,000 of lost revenue from all the people canceling hotels, canceling concert tickets, not gambling, not eating, not going to the spa. And just think about the trickle in all of our municipalities. It's huge, and yet it's never been calculated. December 15th, we'll have a preliminary number.
Is that something to be done end of next year?
So the first draft, December 15, we wanted actionable insights for the new administration, and then June 15 will be the completed report.
So is the study taking a look at our respective locales?
Yes, and it should be segmented out, and then I would love to review that and see how do we drill down, and if we feel, hey, San Juan's isn't getting enough attention on this, from the first draft, we'll be able to then go in and say, hey, we need more depth.
The reason that study, you can thank us and our county and the town of Friday Harbor for asking for it, because that's what got it done. Yeah. And the governor recognized, and you guys recognize the whole system needs that
And
data.
truthfully, I read the Gov's budget, and I was like, that's a great idea, this should be for all of us, so thank you.
There you go, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. That sounds brilliant. Thank you.
Dean?
I just had one interesting example of an economic cost. There was some legislation passed in the 90s in the Washington State Legislature that deals with level of service. To get on Whidbey Island, we have to take a state route. 525 is the road, and the ferry going across there is part of that road. So when the level of service gets too bad, too long of waits for people to get to the island, Island County has to stop issuing building permits. And that's enforceable. It's in the legislature right now. And so that could be an enormous economic detriment.
Yeah.
Vashon's marine highways are 160 and 163. Same deal.
So one of the analogies that came to me when I was thinking about my remarks was that on the land side you have federal highway system, state highway system, county roads, and local roads, and I think we have to think about that at the state level the same way. The Washington State Ferries is a little bit like the federal highway system. It's smaller number of routes, large volume for moving large volumes, construction materials, groceries, etc. We have to start thinking about our county roads. And I think that we should look at the counties and the transit agencies, transit districts, as the administrative construct to run these small unmosquito fleet systems. And that's where, now again, I'm painting this with a broad brush. I recognize it's not going to work everywhere, but I think in most cases, I think it will work. And if it doesn't, we can figure out a little tweak to do it. The beauty of the question that's in front of us is that there are very few people opposed to what we're trying to do. It's just figuring out how do we all get together and do it the same way. So, and I think that this is Amy, I can't tell you enough how impressed I am with what you've been able to put together here, because we need to, legislators respond, and I think that all of these legislators talked about collaboration, coalitions and such. We all have to kind of get together, talk about what we can ask for together at that state level that will benefit us all. There is money to build boats. The challenge in all of these things is not the shoreside infrastructure, in my mind, at the passenger-only ferry level. It's not the infrastructure, it's not the boats, it's operating. It's the operating costs, it's the crew, and the crew and the fuel. That's where the cost is, and that's where we need to get the legislative support from and it's got to be, we've got to figure out a way, and we can, to ensure that it's perpetually funded, not grant funded where it's one-off. That's great for a boat, but that can't be done for crewing. One thing that I always tell people, yes, it's public transit. It requires a subsidy, just the way trains and buses. So you're all familiar with fare box recovery. Fare box recovery on a bus, you probably know this, is at about 20%. A passenger-only ferry service is 40%. Washington State Ferries has like 65% fare box recovery, so they're doing a good job. But for our argument, hey, this is twice as efficient as a bus in terms of economic fare box recovery. The studies that are being proposed, I think that PSRC, I think that the Puget Sound Regional Council is a really good conduit for state funding toward any of the studies that we need to do. I'll finish my thought and then I'll come to you. PSRC currently is not beholden to the North Sound. There are only a certain number of counties. But I've talked to Josh Brown, their executive director, and he says, we'll do whatever the state legislature tells us to do. If they say, do a statewide study, here's $1 million to do it, they'll hire KPFF, who is the people that do all of these studies. But I think that's important. But I think we need to redefine the parameters. We need to be careful not to do the study we did in 2008 and then 2018, because that had, for example, Southworth to Des Moines. Why, right? Maybe that was valuable in 2008, but it's not valuable now.
It also did Bellingham and Friday Burger exclusively. Didn't even look at anything else.
Yeah.
And I mean, we like to look at that. We like to look at it on purpose before we look at it.
Yeah, exactly. So the parameters have to be redefined.
Yeah.
And then I've got, two other points, and then I'll sit down. The possibility of Washington State Ferry's engagement, funding, yes, administrative, no. If they want to give us money to do what we want to do, I think that's wonderful and we should encourage it. If they want to run it, or state legislators want to mandate that they run it, I think we should be just unequivocally opposed to that. And then focus on local initiatives. We did our pilot project in Des Moines, Costa City. We did it for 2 months. We ran one boat. We ran it 5 days a week for 10 hours a day, and we had very ambitious projections. We moved 400% of what we expected to move, and our revenue levels were at 250%. We blew it out of the park. And we did that for a net cost to the city of $200,000. So, yeah. So with that, I'm delighted. Amy can give you, I've got business cards if you want. Amy can put you in touch with me. I'm always happy to answer questions. I know we have other things to do, and so I'll get off from behind the microphone, and thanks again for having me.
All right, so next is we're gonna do a little bread and butter here, a little grassroots work, and basically get into, I think, wherever you're comfortable. But what we're gonna do now is sort of kind of talk about and hopefully decide as granular as we can get about when we're gonna do lobby days. if we're gonna do more than one lobby day, right? If we're gonna do one joint lobby day and each coalition member does their own and pepper it around. So we're gonna dig in a little bit, and then we're gonna talk a little bit, now that we have all these ideas in your head, we're talking about lobby day. Rick and Beth are gonna kind of lead us through a little bit of planning, imagining, exercising around how we get media involved and how do we talk to the media about what it is that we want to do and what's going to be our media messaging. So kind of get in, I would kind of recommend either cross-pollinate or get in your cohort. And Rick and Beth, I'll let you kind of decide like exactly what that looks like. But we're going to be a little bit more closer and nimble, and this is our working session now. So get ready to roll up your sleeves.